The Galactic Council's testing facility on Kepler 442b had witnessed the downfall of champions from 38 different species. The survival chamber stretched across 15,000 square kilometers of engineered hell, scorching deserts that bled into frozen tundra, toxic swamps that neighbor acidic mountain ranges, and predator territories that made veteran soldiers weep. High Arbiter Velnis adjusted his ceremonial robes as he watched the newest candidate step forward. The human diplomat stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail, wearing nothing more elaborate than standard diplomatic attire. No armor, no enhancement suits, no visible weapons or survival gear. "I must reiterate the terms," Velnis announced, his 4 vocal cords creating that distinctive harmonic resonance that had intimidated species across the galaxy. "Candidates may bring nothing. No tools, no clothing, no technological assistance of any kind. You will be transported to a random location within the testing ground and must survive for 72 standard hours." The human, Ren Nakamura, according to the diplomatic files, nodded with what could only be described as enthusiasm. "Understood. When do we start?" Commander Threnok of the Brevani Empire leaned forward in his observation booth. His people had evolved from apex predators on a world where winter lasted 14 local years. 3 of his finest warriors had entered this chamber. None had lasted beyond the first day. "Perhaps we should explain the mortality statistics," he growled through his translator. 86% of candidates require emergency extraction within the first 12 hours. Of those who refuse extraction, the survival rate drops to— "I get it," Ren interrupted, already starting to remove her jacket. "It's designed to be impossible. That's the point, right? Prove that civilized beings can't survive without technology?" Overseer Gex High's tentacles writhed nervously. His aquatic species had contributed the toxic marsh regions after their own champion lasted exactly 47 minutes. The human displays concerning levels of confidence, perhaps additional psychological evaluation. "She's already been cleared by your own psychiatric teams," Prime Directive Ulwin reminded them. The avian representative's feathers had been molting steadily since the human delegation arrived 3 days ago. Something about their scent triggered ancient prey responses he couldn't quite suppress. "All candidates undergo the same preliminary assessment." Ren had finished removing her shoes and was working on her shirt buttons. "Quick question. Are there any rules about what I can do once I'm in there? Like building restrictions or territorial boundaries?" "Survive by any means necessary," Velnis replied. "The environment will test every aspect of your physiology and psychology. Most candidates focus on finding shelter and water sources." "Cool." The shirt came off, revealing what the medical scans had already confirmed. A standard human torso with no visible modifications, no subcutaneous armor, no hidden technology. Just skin, muscle, and what appeared to be several old scars across her shoulders and forearms. "And I can interact with the local wildlife?" Senior Evaluator Dexmara's compound eyes focused intently. "The predator species are genetically modified for maximum aggression. They show no fear response to unfamiliar creatures. Interaction is inadvisable." "Right." Ren stepped out of her pants and stood in standard-issue undergarments. "But not forbidden?" The council members exchanged glances. In 3 centuries of testing, no candidate had ever asked about interacting with the predators. Most spent their time running from them. "Technically, no," Velnis admitted, "though I cannot imagine why." "Perfect." Ren finished undressing and stood completely naked in the preparation chamber. Her skin was pale, clearly adapted for a temperate climate, with no visible protective features, no scales, no thick hide, no insulating fur. Even by human standards, she looked remarkably ordinary. "Let's do this." The transport beam activated without ceremony. One moment, Ren was standing on the polished metal floor of the facility. The next, she had materialized in the middle of a windswept canyon, where the temperature readings showed a brutal 30-degree variance between sun and shadow. The observation feeds came online immediately. Dozens of monitoring stations tracked everything from her core temperature to stress hormone levels. The council members watched in fascination as their sensors registered something unprecedented. Her heart rate was dropping. "That's not possible," murmured Threnok. "All previous candidates showed immediate stress spikes. fight-or-flight response should be maxing out her cardiovascular system. On screen, Ren was turning slowly in place, taking in her surroundings. The canyon stretched for several kilometers in both directions, with towering walls of red stone that offered minimal shelter. Scattered bones from previous candidates dotted the rocky floor, bleached white by the harsh sun. She picked up a femur from what had once been a Quillith warrior and examined it critically. Compound fracture. Something big got him. How does she know it was a male? Gexhai asked. More importantly, Ulwin added, his feathers now fully ruffled, how is she not hypothermic? The ambient temperature is dropping rapidly. Ren had started walking toward the eastern wall, still carrying the bone. Her bare feet showed no signs of distress as they found purchase on the sharp rocks. She moved with a peculiar efficiency, each step deliberate and economical. She's heading for the thermal caves, Dexmara observed. Perhaps she studied the topographical data before. Negative. Velnis was reviewing the preparation protocols. Standard procedure, no advance information provided. Then how? The question died as they watched Ren stop abruptly, tilt her head, and listen. For nearly 30 seconds, she remained motionless. Then, impossibly, she smiled. She turned 90 degrees and began walking directly toward what every scanner in the facility had identified as a Class Alpha predator nest. Emergency protocols, Thranok barked. Prepare extraction beam. Wait, Velnis held up one clawed hand. Let's see what she does. What she did was approach a cave entrance that reeked of death and decay, where the remains of 6 different species lay scattered across the threshold like a macabre welcome mat. The creature inside was a grimscale, 8 feet of armored muscle and teeth, genetically enhanced for maximum aggression and modified to hunt anything that moved. Ren stopped just outside claw range and knocked on the stone wall. "Hello in there," she called out cheerfully. "I'm not looking for trouble, just wanted to introduce myself. I'll be staying in the neighborhood for a few days." The response was a roar that registered on seismic sensors 3 kilometers away. The grimscale burst from its cave in a fury of scales and fangs, moving faster than most species could track. Ren sidestepped. Not a desperate dive or panicked leap, just a casual step to the left, as if she'd been expecting exactly that response. The grimscale's momentum carried it past her and into the canyon wall with a sound like a shuttle crash. "Okay, so you're not the talking type." She was still holding the bone, now gripping it like a club. "That's fine. We can work with non-verbal communication." The grimscale shook off its impact and turned, eyes burning with predatory rage. It had never encountered prey that didn't run. Every instinct told it to attack again, harder this time. It charged. Ren dropped to one knee and drove the sharpened end of the femur directly into the creature's soft underbelly, using its own momentum against it. The grimscale's roar became a scream, then a whimper as it collapsed. The monitoring stations went silent. Did she just... Gexhai's tentacles had gone completely rigid. "Kill a grimscale," Thranok finished, "with a bone, while naked." "In under 2 minutes," Dexmara added weakly. On screen, Ren was examining her handiwork with professional interest. She grabbed the grimscale by its massive hind leg and began dragging it back toward the cave entrance. "What is she doing now?" Ulwin whispered. They watched in growing horror as the small human disappeared into the cave system, hauling 800 pounds of dead predator behind her, like it was a piece of luggage. For the next hour, the external sensors detected sounds that defied classification. Scraping, tearing, what might have been construction, and occasionally something that sounded disturbingly like humming. When Ren finally emerged, she was wearing grimscale hide like a crude jacket and carrying an armload of materials that hadn't existed an hour ago. Somehow, she had fashioned tools from the creature's bones, containers from its organs, and cordage from its sinews. She had also, according to the thermal readings, started a fire inside the cave. "Impossible," Thranok breathed. "There's no combustible material in that cave system. We surveyed every inch." "Check the atmospheric readings," Velnis ordered. The numbers scrolled across their displays. Oxygen levels inside the cave were rising. Carbon dioxide showed controlled burn patterns. The temperature was stabilizing at what humans would consider comfortable. "She's made the cave habitable," Gexhai reported in a stunned whisper. How? Their question was answered when Wren began collecting specific types of rock from the canyon floor. She moved with purpose, selecting stones based on criteria none of them understood. Within another hour, she had built what appeared to be a crude but functional forge. The bone tools became metal tools. The hide clothing became fitted garments. What had started as a survival situation was rapidly becoming something that looked disturbingly like a civilization bootstrap program. Day 1 analysis, Dexamara announced shakily. Subject has eliminated a Class Alpha predator, established permanent shelter, created multiple categories of tools, initiated sustainable fire production, and appears to be entering what can only be described as the Bronze Age. It's been 4 hours, Ulwin pointed out. I know. As the local sun set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, the council members watched their monitors in stunned silence. The human had not only survived, she had thrived in ways that violated everything they thought they knew about survival. Worse, she was singing. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a hauntingly beautiful melody that spoke of home and hearth and safety. It was the sound of a creature that felt no fear, faced no desperation, encountered no hardship it couldn't overcome with patience and ingenuity. It was the sound of a predator that had found its territory. Day 1 report, Wellness announced formally, though his voice lacked its usual authority. Human candidate shows unexpected adaptation to test conditions. Sir, a technician called from the monitoring station, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The human has attracted attention. Multiple species are converging on her location. The displays showed heat signatures moving through the canyon system from all directions. Night hunters drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of easy prey. At least a dozen different predator species, all heading for Wren's cave. Emergency extraction, Thranok suggested hopefully. She hasn't requested it, Wellness reminded him. On screen, Wren was adding fuel to her forge fire, apparently unconcerned by the approaching danger. She had fashioned what appeared to be a spear from grimscale bone and metal salvaged from her tools. The weapon looked crude but functional. The first predator appeared at the canyon mouth, a shadow stalker, evolved for stealth kills in low-light conditions. Its entire body was designed for silent movement and quick strikes. Wren looked up from her forge and waved. Evening, she called out cheerfully. You're just in time for dinner. The shadow stalker froze, confused by prey that announced itself. In that moment of hesitation, Wren's spear took it through the chest with surgical precision. Make that dinner for 2, she corrected, and began dragging the second carcass toward her cave. The remaining predators arrived to find the canyon floor littered with the remains of their competition and a small human sitting by a fire, calmly butchering meat for what appeared to be a substantial meal. They approached cautiously, unused to prey that didn't flee or fight desperately for its life. This human showed no fear scent, no panic responses. She moved with the casual confidence of an apex predator in its own territory. One by one, they decided to hunt elsewhere. End of day 1, Dexamara announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Human candidate has eliminated multiple Class Alpha threats, established territorial dominance, and appears to be cooking. The scent of roasted meat was drifting up from the canyon, detected by the facility's atmospheric sensors. It smelled, according to the analysis, like a very good barbecue. Gentlemen, Wellness said quietly, I believe we may have underestimated humanity. Through the monitoring feeds, they could hear Wren humming again as she tended her fire. The sound was peaceful, domestic, utterly content. It was the sound of a species that had never learned to fear the dark. The second day began with what the monitoring stations initially registered as a seismic anomaly. Deep, rhythmic impacts were coming from the canyon system, too regular to be natural, too powerful to be made by any known creature in the testing ground. High Arbiter Wellness had not slept. None of the council members had. They maintained their vigil in the observation chamber, watching displays that showed readings so far outside normal parameters that the computers kept flagging them as sensor malfunctions. Status report, he demanded from the lead technician. Sir, the human appears to be excavating. The screens showed Wren had somehow acquired a crude but effective pickaxe. She was systematically digging into the canyon wall, following what appeared to be a mineral vein. Each strike sent chips of stone flying with mechanical precision. "What is she mining?" Commander Threnok asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Iron ore, sir. High grade. She's also located copper deposits and what our sensors indicate might be limestone." Overseer Gexhi's tentacles writhed anxiously. Those materials weren't supposed to be accessible. The geological surveys indicated only trace amounts. "The human seems to have better geological knowledge than our surveys," the technician replied weakly. On screen, Wren paused in her mining to examine a chunk of ore. She held it up to the light, testing its weight, then nodded with satisfaction and tossed it onto a growing pile of raw materials. "She's building an inventory," Prime Directive Ulwin observed. His molting had gotten worse overnight, leaving a ring of feathers around his observation perch. "This isn't survival behavior, this is industrial development." The truth of his words became apparent as they watched Wren construct what could only be described as a smelting operation. Using techniques that should have taken decades to develop, she had created a functional metal refinery using nothing but rocks, bones, and apparent expertise in metallurgy that no diplomatic file had mentioned. "Check her educational background again," Velnis ordered. "Sir, we've reviewed it 17 times. Standard diplomatic training, xenocultural studies, basic scientific literacy. No engineering degrees, no survival training, no metallurgy courses." "Then how—" The question was interrupted by an alert from the perimeter sensors. Something massive was moving toward the canyon, something the system had never encountered before. "Classification?" Threnok demanded. "Unknown, sir. It's bigger than anything in our database." The displays shifted to long-range thermal imaging. A creature the size of a small building was making its way across the desert toward Wren's location. Its heat signature was unlike anything they had catalogued. Too hot to be reptilian, too large to be mammalian, with energy patterns that suggested some form of internal combustion. "Emergency extraction," Gexhi commanded. "Immediately." "Sir, the human hasn't requested." "Override her authority. That creature will kill her in seconds." "Wait." Velnis was studying the tactical display. "Look at her biometrics." Wren's heart rate was steady. Her stress hormones showed no elevation. According to every sensor they had, she was completely calm. She had also stopped mining and was looking directly toward the approaching creature, despite it still being several kilometers away and completely invisible from her position. "How does she know it's coming?" Ulwin whispered. They got their answer when Wren cupped her hands around her mouth and called out across the desert. The sound carried impossibly far in the thin air, a long, haunting call that seemed to echo from the canyon walls themselves. The massive creature changed direction. "It's responding to her," Dexmara reported in amazement. "She's communicating with it." What approached was beyond anything in their xenobiology textbooks. 20 feet tall at the shoulder, covered in armored scales that glowed with internal heat, with 6 legs and a head that was mostly teeth. It had been designed as the ultimate predator, too large and aggressive to coexist with any other life form. It stopped at the canyon entrance and made a sound like grinding metal. Wren made the same sound back. "She's speaking its language," the lead technician reported faintly. "Somehow she's communicating in vocalizations that should be impossible for human anatomy to produce." The creature, the files designated it as a Titan-class devastator, lowered its massive head and extended what appeared to be a greeting gesture. Wren walked over and patted it on the snout. "That's not possible," Threnok growled. "Devastators attack anything that moves. They're programmed for maximum aggression." "This one isn't attacking," Gexhi observed unnecessarily. They watched in stunned silence as Wren began what could only be described as a negotiation. She showed the creature her mining operation, her forge, her stockpile of materials. The Devastator examined everything with apparent interest, occasionally making those grinding metal sounds that Wren somehow understood and replied to. Within an hour, they had reached some kind of agreement. The Devastator began bringing Wren raw materials from across the testing ground, rare metals from the frozen regions, exotic minerals from the toxic swamps, materials that weren't supposed to exist anywhere on the planet. "Sir," the technician called out, voice cracking with stress, "the human's operation is expanding exponentially. Current rate of resource acquisition suggests she'll have processed more raw materials than our last 50 candidates combined." "In 2 days," Velnis added grimly. Actually, sir, by the end of today. Wren had enlisted the Devastator as a mining and transport partner. The creature's natural heat output made it perfect for ore processing, while its size allowed it to access materials from areas the testing ground's designers thought were unreachable. But that wasn't the concerning part. The concerning part was that other creatures were starting to show up. First, a pack of shadow stalkers arrived, drawn by curiosity rather than hunger. Wren greeted them like old friends, offered them cooked meat from her growing food stores, and somehow convinced them to help with construction projects. Then came the razor birds, flying predators designed to attack anything in the air. They began bringing her materials from the mountain peaks, trading altitude access for whatever it was Wren was offering in return. She's building an ecosystem, Ulwin realized with growing horror. She's not just surviving, she's creating a functional society. By midday, what had been a barren canyon was bustling with activity. The Devastator hauled materials while Shadowstalkers worked on construction projects. Razorbirds provided aerial reconnaissance, while smaller predators handled detail work, all of them working together in apparent harmony, coordinated by a naked human who spoke their languages and understood their needs. "This is impossible," Gexhai declared. "Our behavioral models show these species are incompatible. They should be killing each other, not cooperating." "They're cooperating because of her," Dexmara observed. "She's functioning as some kind of universal translator and coordinator." The proof came when a territorial dispute broke out between two different predator species over access to a water source. Both groups appeared ready to fight when Wren walked between them and began what appeared to be mediation. Within minutes, they had reached a peaceful resolution and were working together again. "Check the psychological profiles," Velnis ordered. "What kind of training produces this level of interspecies communication ability?" "Sir, there's no training that could produce this. What she's doing requires intimate knowledge of dozens of different behavioral patterns, communication methods, and social structures. It should take decades of study to understand even one of these species." "Then how—" The question was cut off by proximity alarms. The facility's long-range sensors had detected movement from the restricted zones, areas of the testing ground that were considered too dangerous even for the most advanced candidates. Something was coming from the hellscape wastes. The wastes were a region of the planet where the environmental designers had gotten carried away. Toxic atmosphere, unstable geology, and predator species so dangerous they were kept isolated from the rest of the testing ground. Nothing was supposed to be able to survive there for more than minutes. "What's the classification?" Thranok demanded. "Unknown, sir. It's big, really big." The thermal signature was massive, easily twice the size of the Devastator, with energy readings that suggested some form of plasma-based biology. It was heading directly for Wren's canyon, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. "Emergency extraction now," Velnis commanded. "Whatever that thing is, it's beyond the test parameters." "Sir, I can't get a lock on her position. Something is interfering with the transport beam." On screen, Wren was standing at the canyon mouth, looking toward the approaching threat. Her assembled collection of predators had formed a protective formation around her, but they looked nervous for the first time since arriving. The ground began to shake as the creature approached. Whatever it was, its footsteps registered on seismic instruments throughout the facility. Then they saw it. The thing that emerged from the hellscape wastes defied classification. It stood 40 feet tall with crystalline armor that glowed with internal fire and limbs that ended in what appeared to be natural plasma cannons. Its roar shattered rock formations 3 kilometers away. It was a Primarch, a creature so dangerous that only one had ever been created, then locked in the wastes because it was considered too destructive to use in testing. "How did it get out?" Gexhai whispered. "More importantly," Ulwin added, "how is it here?" The Primarch approached the canyon with obvious hostile intent. Every sensor showed maximum aggression patterns, energy buildup that indicated imminent attack, posturing that suggested it viewed everything in sight as a threat to be eliminated. Wren walked toward it. Her collection of predators followed, not in attack formation, but in what appeared to be a diplomatic procession. The Devastator took point, with Shadowstalkers flanking and Razorbirds providing aerial escort. "She's going to get them all killed," Thranok observed. The Primarch raised its plasma cannon arms and began charging for an attack that would vaporize everything within a kilometer radius. Wren started singing. Not the casual humming they had heard before, but something deeper, more complex. A melody that seemed to resonate with the canyon walls, with the ground itself, with frequencies that their instruments couldn't fully register. The Primarch stopped charging its weapons. "What is she doing?" Dexmara asked in amazement. The answer came as other voices joined Ren's song. The Devastator added its grinding harmonics, the Shadowstalkers contributed their hunting calls, the Razorbirds provided high-pitched counterpoint. What emerged was a complex musical structure that somehow incorporated the natural sounds of dozens of different species. The Primarch listened for nearly 5 minutes, then slowly lowered its weapons. It began adding its own voice to the song. "She's conducting an interspecies chorus," the lead technician reported in a voice barely above a whisper. "Somehow, she's found a common musical language that transcends species barriers." When the song ended, the Primarch approached Ren with what appeared to be respectful curiosity. She gestured toward her industrial operation, her growing community, her vision of the canyon as something more than a survival challenge. The Primarch examined everything with apparent interest, then made a sound like controlled thunder. Ren made the same sound back, then pointed toward the hellscape wastes. Within the hour, the Primarch was leading expeditions to the most dangerous regions of the planet, bringing back materials and creatures that weren't supposed to exist. The wastes themselves were being transformed from a forbidden zone into a resource extraction operation. "End of Day 2 report," Velnis announced, though his voice lacked any trace of authority. "Human candidate has established industrial operations, created interspecies cooperation protocols, pacified restricted zone hazards, and appears to be terraforming sections of the testing ground." "Sir," a technician called out, "we have another problem." "What now?" "The human success is being noticed. We're receiving communications from other species requesting permission to enter the testing ground." "What kind of communications?" "Diplomatic inquiries, sir. 3 separate star systems want to establish trade relations with, and I quote, the Canyon civilization." Velnis stared at the displays showing Ren's expanding operation. What had started as a survival test was rapidly becoming something that looked disturbingly like the foundation of a new civilization. Worse, it was a civilization that other species wanted to join. "Sir," the technician prompted, "how do we respond to the diplomatic requests?" Velnis didn't answer. He was watching the screens where a naked human was teaching a Primarch how to operate a metal forge, while a dozen different predator species worked together on construction projects that shouldn't have been possible. The third day began with an emergency session that had been called without authorization, attended by representatives who weren't supposed to know the testing facility existed, discussing a situation that violated 17 different sections of the Galactic Survival Accords. High Arbiter Velnis found himself explaining the impossible to an audience of the galaxy's most powerful beings, all of whom were staring at live feeds that showed what could only be described as a thriving metropolitan area where 72 hours ago there had been empty desert. "Clarify your report," demanded Supreme Chancellor Nexin of the Hegemony. Her crystalline form reflected the display screens in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. "You claim a single human has established what appears to be a functioning city-state inside a restricted testing environment." "That is accurate," Velnis admitted. The displays showed aerial views of Ren's Canyon, now transformed beyond recognition. What had started as basic mining operations had evolved into a complex of workshops, housing areas, and public spaces that housed at least 40 different species working in apparent harmony. Smoke rose from countless forges and cooking fires, while organized groups moved through streets that definitely hadn't existed 3 days ago. "Explain the architectural impossibilities," ordered Admiral Corvin, his cybernetic implants clicking as they processed the visual data. "Those structures show engineering principles that shouldn't exist, load-bearing calculations that violate basic physics." Commander Threnok gestured toward the technical readouts. "The human appears to understand structural engineering at a level that surpasses our best architects. She's using techniques that combine biological adaptation with mechanical innovation in ways our theorists claim are impossible." "More concerning," added Prime Directive Ulwin, now completely featherless from stress molting, is her apparent ability to facilitate cooperation between species that are genetically programmed for mutual hostility. On screen, a group of shadow stalkers was working alongside thermal hunters, species that had been specifically designed to be incompatible. They were constructing what appeared to be a water distribution system, coordinating their efforts through a communication method that involved musical tones, gesture patterns, and scent markers that none of the observers understood. This violates fundamental xenobiological principles, observed Dr. Quental, the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies conflict resolution. These cooperation patterns shouldn't be possible without decades of careful behavioral conditioning. The human accomplished it in 2 days, Gexhai added miserably. Supreme Chancellor Nexon's form shifted to a darker crystal configuration that indicated extreme displeasure. You're telling me that a single unconditioned human has solved interspecies cooperation challenges that have stymied our best scientists for centuries? It appears so. And she did this while naked, without tools, in an environment designed to kill anything that enters it? Yes. The silence that followed was broken only by the clicking of Admiral Corvin's implants as they processed calculations that refused to make sense. "Show me the current status," Nexon commanded. The displays switched to real-time feeds from throughout the canyon. The transformation was staggering. Wren had not only created a functioning civilization, she had established what appeared to be trade relationships with the testing facility itself. Creatures were bringing her materials from regions the facility's designers didn't even know existed, while her industrial operations were producing goods that registered as superior to standard galactic manufacturing. "Sir," a technician reported, "we're receiving formal diplomatic communications from 43 separate star systems. They're requesting trade agreements with what they're calling the Canyon Collective." "Based on what information?" Nexon demanded. "Word is spreading through informal channels. Apparently, the quality of metalwork and technological innovation coming from the humans' operation is attracting attention from industrial guilds across the spiral arm." On screen, Wren was demonstrating something to a group of mixed species that the monitoring computers were having trouble classifying. She appeared to be teaching them advanced metallurgy techniques using methods that combined chemistry, engineering, and what looked disturbingly like art therapy. "The psychological profiles are equally concerning," Dr. Quental reported. "Every species in that canyon is showing elevated happiness indicators, improved health metrics, and social cooperation levels that exceed our baseline measurements for their optimal environments." "Meaning what exactly?" Admiral Corvin asked. "Meaning they're not just surviving under her leadership, they're thriving in ways that suggest she's created social conditions superior to their natural habitats." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If a single human could create better living conditions for multiple species than their own evolved environments provided, what did that say about the galactic community's understanding of civilization itself? "There's more," Velnis added reluctantly. "Show them the innovation reports." The screens displayed a catalogue of technological developments that had emerged from the canyon in the past 24 hours. Advanced metallurgical techniques that increased material strength by 40%. Water purification systems that operated without external power sources. Agricultural methods that seemed to accelerate plant growth using nothing but creative soil management. "Each of these innovations represents years of research by our best teams," explained Chief Science Officer Dexmara. "The human has independently developed all of them using basic materials and primitive tools." "Impossible," Admiral Corvin stated flatly. "No single individual possesses the knowledge base required for such diverse technological innovation." "Yet the evidence is undeniable," Threnok replied. "Moreover, she's teaching these techniques to other species who are adapting them to their own biological and cultural requirements." On screen, a group of thermal hunters was demonstrating a modified version of Wren's forge techniques that incorporated their natural heat resistance. The results were producing metal alloys that the facility's scanners couldn't identify. "She's not just innovating," Dr. Quental observed with growing alarm. "She's creating a knowledge-sharing network that's accelerating technological development exponentially." Supreme Chancellor Nexon's crystalline form was now pulsing with patterns that indicated maximum alert status. "What are the containment protocols?" "That's a problem," Velnis admitted. Standard extraction procedures assume a single subject requiring rescue. We don't have protocols for removing an entire civilization. Then create them. Ma'am, the humans' operation now includes 43 different species, 17 permanent structures, and 6 separate industrial complexes. More importantly, none of them want to leave. The truth of this became apparent as they watched the displays. The canyon wasn't just a survival success story, it was a community. Creatures that had been designed as solitary predators were forming social bonds, sharing resources, and engaging in what appeared to be recreational activities during their downtime. "Show them the evening reports," Ulwin suggested weakly. The screens switched to thermal imaging from the previous night. Instead of the isolated survival struggles they expected, the canyon showed patterns of organized social activity. Communal meals, group music sessions, what appeared to be storytelling gatherings, and collaborative art projects that involved species working together on massive murals covering the canyon walls. "She's created culture," Dr. Quental whispered. "In 3 days, she's established not just survival protocols, but actual cultural traditions." "It gets worse," Dexmara added. "Show them the expansion plans." New displays revealed construction projects extending beyond the original canyon. The community was building roads, establishing satellite settlements, and creating infrastructure that suggested permanent expansion rather than temporary survival. "They're not planning to leave," Admiral Corvin realized. "They're planning to stay and grow." "The human has turned a survival test into a colonization project," Nexon stated grimly. "And she's done it using our own resources and facilities." A new alarm sounded from the monitoring stations. "Sir," a technician called out, "we have a situation." "What now?" "The human is approaching the facility's main entrance. She's asking to speak with management." The screens showed Wren walking calmly toward the testing facility's primary access point, accompanied by a delegation that included the Devastator, several Shadow Stalkers, and what appeared to be a Primarch wearing some kind of decorative armor that definitely hadn't existed 72 hours ago. She was still naked, but now she wore accessories crafted from materials that the facility's scanners couldn't identify. Her hair was braided with what appeared to be metallic threads that gleamed with internal light, and she carried a staff that registered as both technological device and artistic masterpiece. "Sir," the technician continued, "she's broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies." "Put her through." Wren's voice filled the observation chamber with confident authority that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "Good morning, Galactic Council. I hope you've been enjoying the show." The council members exchanged glances. None of them had expected her to sound so professional. "I believe we need to discuss the terms of my continued residence," Wren continued. "My community has grown rather attached to the area, and we'd like to make arrangements for permanent settlement." "Negative," Nexon responded immediately. "The testing facility is not available for colonization." "I understand your position," Wren replied diplomatically. "However, I think you'll find that circumstances have changed somewhat. My people have developed some rather interesting technologies that I believe would be of significant value to the galactic community." "Your people?" "The Canyon Collective," Wren explained. "We've established a functioning democracy with representatives from every species involved. We've also created innovations in metallurgy, agriculture, and interspecies cooperation that I think you'll find quite remarkable." The displays showed the truth of her words. The canyon now housed a complex society with clear governance structures, resource allocation systems, and technological capabilities that exceeded anything the testing facility had ever produced. "You have no authority to establish sovereign territory within council jurisdiction," Admiral Corvin declared. "Actually," Wren replied with what sounded like a smile, "I think you'll find that we do. According to Article 12 of the Galactic Settlement Accords, any group that successfully establishes a functioning civilization in previously uninhabited territory has the right to petition for recognition as an autonomous collective." The silence that followed was deafening. "She's right," Dr. Quental whispered. "The settlement accords don't distinguish between planned colonization and spontaneous community formation." "Moreover," Wren continued, We've already received preliminary recognition from 43 separate star systems that are interested in establishing trade relationships. I believe that constitutes sufficient political support for sovereignty claims. Supreme Chancellor Nexon's crystalline form had shifted to a configuration that indicated barely controlled fury. This was supposed to be a survival test. And I survived, Ren pointed out cheerfully. In fact, I thrived. We all did. Which brings me to my main point. Which is, your testing methodology is fundamentally flawed. You're not testing survival ability, you're testing conformity to galactic prejudices about what survival should look like. The accusation hit the council chamber like a physical blow. Explain, Nexon commanded. You designed this test based on the assumption that survival is a desperate individual struggle against hostile forces. But that's only true if you don't understand cooperation, innovation, and community building. Humans excel at all three. On screen, the canyon community was beginning its daily activities. The sight of multiple species working together in obvious harmony, creating art, sharing meals, and solving problems collectively provided uncomfortable evidence for Ren's argument. You wanted to know if humans could survive without technology, she continued. The answer is yes, but we don't just survive. We build, we adapt, we bring others with us, we create something better than what we found. This changes nothing, Admiral Corvin declared. The test concludes in 18 hours. You will be extracted according to standard protocols. I'm afraid that's not going to work, Ren replied calmly. We're not leaving. You don't have a choice. Actually, we do. You see, there's something about human survival capabilities that you've fundamentally misunderstood. Which is? We're not just good at surviving hostile environments. We're good at making hostile environments survivable for everyone else. The truth of her words was visible in every screen, every sensor reading, every impossible accomplishment she had achieved in 72 hours. And now that my people have seen what's possible, Ren continued, they're not interested in going back to the old way of doing things. The shocking part came 12 hours later when the facility's deepest sensors detected something that should have been impossible. The planet was healing itself. Atmospheric readings showed improving air quality in regions that had been toxic for decades. Radiation levels in the hellscape wastes were dropping to safe parameters. The acidic mountain ranges were showing mineral composition changes that suggested active neutralization processes. How is this happening? Supreme Chancellor Nexon demanded, her crystalline form shifting through configurations that indicated confusion rather than anger. The answer came from Dr. Quental, who had spent the last several hours analyzing data streams that defied every environmental model in their databases. The humans' community isn't just sustainable, it's regenerative. They're actively repairing environmental damage through integrated biological and technological processes. On the main display, aerial views showed the transformation spreading outward from the canyon in visible waves. Dead zones were sprouting vegetation, contaminated water sources were running clear. The testing ground that had been designed as a nightmare hellscape was becoming something that looked disturbingly like paradise. The metallurgical processes alone should be generating massive pollution, Admiral Corvin protested. Industrial operations of this scale require environmental sacrifices. Not these operations, Dexmara replied, highlighting specific readings. They've developed closed-loop systems that eliminate waste products by converting them into useful materials. Nothing is discarded. Everything becomes input for another process. Ren's voice crackled through the communication system. Are you beginning to understand yet? Understand what? Nexon snapped. Why humans don't have fur? The statement was so unexpected that the entire council chamber fell silent. Elaborate, Velnis commanded. Every species in this facility evolved specialized adaptations for survival in specific environments. Thick hides for harsh climates, enhanced senses for hunting, toxin resistance for dangerous territories. You look at humans and see weakness because we lack these adaptations. The displays shifted to show comparative biological analyses, humans versus the other species in the canyon community. But specialized adaptation creates dependency, Ren continued. Your fur works perfectly in cold climates and terribly in hot ones. Your enhanced strength functions well for hunting but poorly for delicate work. Your toxin resistance protects you from specific dangers while making you vulnerable to others. This is basic evolutionary theory, Admiral Corvin interrupted. What's your point? Humans didn't evolve specialized survival features because we evolved something better. We evolved the ability to adapt our environment to our needs rather than adapting ourselves to environmental demands. The truth of her statement was visible throughout the transformed testing ground. Where other species had struggled against hostile conditions, humans had simply eliminated the hostility. You created this test to prove that complex beings can't survive without technology, Wren explained. But you missed the fundamental point. Humans are technology. Our brains, our social structures, our capacity for innovation and cooperation, these aren't just survival tools. They're the foundation of our species' primary evolutionary strategy. Which is? Dr. Quental asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Making everywhere livable for everyone. The displays showed the proof. The canyon community wasn't just surviving, it was creating conditions where every species present was thriving better than they ever had in their original environments. Thermal hunters were more efficient in Wren's forges than in their native volcanic regions. Shadow stalkers were more successful in her organized hunting groups than in their solitary natural state. The human facility isn't an anomaly, observed Overseer Gex-High with growing realization. It's a demonstration of their species' primary survival strategy. Exactly, Wren confirmed. Other species adapt to their environment through biological evolution over millions of years. Humans adapt their environment through technological and social evolution over decades, sometimes over days, as you've observed. The implications were staggering. If humans could transform hostile environments into thriving communities in a matter of days, what could they accomplish given years, centuries? What could they do with access to galactic-level resources and technology? Sir, a technician called out urgently. We're receiving reports from across the sector. Multiple star systems are requesting immediate meetings with human representatives. Requesting what? Nexon demanded. Environmental rehabilitation services, ma'am. Apparently word has spread about the atmospheric improvements here. 16 different worlds want to hire humans for ecosystem restoration projects. Admiral Corvin's cybernetic implants were clicking rapidly as they processed the political ramifications. If humans can repair damaged environments as efficiently as they've demonstrated here, they'll control every rehabilitation contract in the galaxy. More than that, Dr. Quental added grimly. They'll control the definition of what constitutes environmental damage. If they can make any environment livable for any species, they effectively control habitability standards. Which means they control colonization rights, Velnis realized, and terraforming contracts, and resource extraction permits. Show them the final calculations, Wren suggested helpfully. The displays filled with economic projections that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. If human environmental adaptation techniques were as scalable as initial data suggested, they represented a potential economic revolution that would shift galactic power balances within decades. You planned this, Nexon accused. Not specifically, Wren replied. But we did know that survival tests reveal more about the testers than the tested. Your challenge was designed around assumptions about survival that don't apply to humans. We don't survive hostile environments. We eliminate the hostility. And now? Now you have a choice. You can continue pretending that humans are some kind of biological curiosity, or you can recognize that we're an environmental solution to problems you didn't even know you had. The canyon displays showed the continuing transformation. What had been the galaxy's most dangerous testing ground was becoming a model community that dozens of species were petitioning to join. Reports were flooding in from across known space about delegations requesting permission to visit, study, and establish relationships with the Canyon Collective. The testing period officially ended 6 hours ago, Admiral Corvin pointed out. I know, Wren replied cheerfully, but my people voted to stay, unanimously. This sets an unprecedented legal situation, Dr. Quental observed. A successful test candidate establishing sovereign territory using council resources. Unprecedented but not illegal, Wren reminded them. And profitable, if you're interested in joint ventures. The offer hung in the air like a challenge and an opportunity simultaneously. Supreme Chancellor Nexon studied the displays showing a thriving civilization where 3 days ago there had been only death and desolation. Her crystalline form shifted to configurations that indicated careful consideration rather than automatic rejection. "What are your terms?" she asked finally. "Simple. Recognition of the Canyon Collective as an autonomous territory. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, and consulting contracts for environmental rehabilitation projects. And in return, we share our techniques with Council scientists. We provide environmental services to member worlds, and we demonstrate that cooperation creates better outcomes than competition." The vote was closer than anyone expected. When it concluded, the Galactic Council had officially recognized humanity's first extrasolar territory, established the precedent for environmental rehabilitation as a recognized political strategy, and inadvertently created the foundation for what historians would later call the Cooperation Protocols. Wren stood in her canyon, surrounded by a community that represented the successful integration of dozens of species who had never imagined such cooperation was possible. She was still naked, still smiling, still humming softly as she worked. But now she was also a sovereign leader, an environmental consultant, and the architect of a new model for galactic civilization. All because someone had asked if humans could survive without technology. They had survived, they had thrived, and they had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to humans is underestimate their capacity to make the impossible seem routine. "Environmental rehabilitation services, ma'am. Apparently word has spread about the atmospheric improvements here. 16 different worlds want to hire humans for ecosystem restoration projects." Admiral Corvin's cybernetic implants were clicking rapidly as they processed the political ramifications. If humans can repair damaged environments as efficiently as they've demonstrated here, they'll control every rehabilitation contract in the galaxy. More than that, Dr. Quental added grimly. They'll control the definition of what constitutes environmental damage. If they can make any environment livable for any species, they effectively control habitability standards. Which means they control colonization rights, Velnis realized, and terraforming contracts, and resource extraction permits. "Show them the final calculations," Wren suggested helpfully. The displays filled with economic projections that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. If human environmental adaptation techniques were as scalable as initial data suggested, they represented a potential economic revolution that would shift galactic power balances within decades. "You planned this," Nexon accused. "Not specifically," Wren replied. "But we did know that survival tests reveal more about the testers than the tested. Your challenge was designed around assumptions about survival that don't apply to humans. We don't survive hostile environments. We eliminate the hostility. And now? Now you have a choice. You can continue pretending that humans are some kind of biological curiosity, or you can recognize that we're an environmental solution to problems you didn't even know you had." The canyon displays showed the continuing transformation. What had been the galaxy's most dangerous testing ground was becoming a model community that dozens of species were petitioning to join. Reports were flooding in from across known space about delegations requesting permission to visit, study, and establish relationships with the Canyon Collective. "The testing period officially ended 6 hours ago," Admiral Corvin pointed out. "I know," Wren replied cheerfully, "but my people voted to stay, unanimously." "This sets an unprecedented legal situation," Dr. Quental observed. "A successful test candidate establishing sovereign territory using council resources. Unprecedented but not illegal," Wren reminded them, "and profitable if you're interested in joint ventures." The offer hung in the air like a challenge and an opportunity simultaneously. Supreme Chancellor Nexon studied the displays showing a thriving civilization where 3 days ago there had been only death and desolation. Her crystalline form shifted to configurations that indicated careful consideration rather than automatic rejection. "What are your terms?" she asked finally. "Simple. Recognition of the Canyon Collective as an autonomous territory. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, and consulting contracts for environmental rehabilitation projects. And in return, We share our techniques with council scientists. We provide environmental services to member worlds, and we demonstrate that cooperation creates better outcomes than competition. The vote was closer than anyone expected. When it concluded, the Galactic Council had officially recognized humanity's first extrasolar territory, established the precedent for environmental rehabilitation as a recognized political strategy, and inadvertently created the foundation for what historians would later call the Cooperation Protocols. Wren stood in her canyon, surrounded by a community that represented the successful integration of dozens of species who had never imagined such cooperation was possible. She was still naked, still smiling, still humming softly as she worked. But now she was also a sovereign leader, an environmental consultant, and the architect of a new model for galactic civilization. All because someone had asked if humans could survive without technology. They had survived, they had thrived, and they had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to humans is underestimate their capacity to make the impossible seem routine.